Right, okay. So I got a texture loading, and I'm gonna just carry on with doing some more graphics API stuff. I got some sprites, like this dude's a sprite. It looks really horrible because it's got bilinear filtering on it and it's too big and stuff. But basically, I'm gonna do a little 2D top-down game. But before doing that, I need to just do a bit of housekeeping, really. So far I've created shader objects, textures, and I think that's about it. Vertex buffers and index buffers in D3D. But I'm not doing any cleanup. I haven't done any delete functions. So I'm going to add mechanisms to delete resources from the graphics API. I'm also going to synchronize the 3 threads so that when I exit the game, what happens at the moment, the game will crash if I do this. Luckily it didn't that time, but depending on what's going on with the threads, the game might crash because the main loop exits or the D3D device is destroyed while the game thread's still making draw calls, for instance. And also I'm getting like a million D3D warnings out into the console about a sampler not being set. So I also need to implement that functionality. So I guess not really much new stuff's going to be going on this time. I'm just going to be doing some more graphics API calls and wrapping them up. But hopefully I'm not far away from actually starting to make a little bit of a game or something, and that might be a bit more interesting. So I just get on with this, try and get it out of the way. So I keep things neat and tidy as I go along, and then yeah, when I start to do the game, I'll be building it on top of a better foundation. Right, so what I've got now is I did some quick code just to release the texture resources, the shader resources, and the buffer resources. I didn't do an input layout one because I'm thinking about just getting rid of the input layout and just building an input layout from the input signature of the shader. Doing that, you need to use the D3D shader reflect, which requires including the shader compiler. So I'm in two minds about it, but you can kind of just basically programmatically create an input layout from the input signature of the shader. I don't know why it doesn't do that implicitly for you. Obviously, if you create your own input layout, you can map your vertex buffer to a shader differently. And I noticed on D3D there doesn't seem to be a fetch shader like you get on some other platforms. So the input layout kind of defines the fetch shader, I guess. So yeah, what I've got is cleaned up some memory. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to load some other textures and buffers, just create some duplicate ones and free them, or like free them at the end of the program. And also I suspended the render thread and the game thread when the main thread's shutting down, so hopefully I should be able to get it to not crash now. So just have a little test by running the game and exiting a few times and seeing if it still crashes. Oh, it crashes anyway. Okay, so it's a bit more stable now. The destroy wasn't working, but I've got the renderer in another thread that's been suspended. So suspending the threads probably isn't the best way to go about this actually, and I need to have a think about doing it a better way and requesting from the main thread that we want to exit, waiting for threads to finish, and allowing them to clean up nicely. So I'm not going to do that just now. I need to get in the sampler stuff because I want to get rid of this error in the console, and also I need to think about how to handle how resources are allocated by the renderer. So if you create a texture with the direct rendering API, it will return you a handle from a list of it's just arrays of objects, and it increments the count. So I've got a number of clear states, color buffers, all this, and at the moment all it's doing is incrementing this number. So if one of these was to be freed, then I would never go back to it. So I need a way to manage this. The problem is that also the deferred API will return the next index here that the direct API will allocate later, so the handles that you use are the same. So I need to devise a system where I can reuse this memory, maybe by having a list of free objects might be the best approach. So I'm going to have a think about that and try and get that implemented, because I think that's most important at the moment. So I've got a solution to that problem and implemented it, and I still need to test it, so it's probably not going to work straight away as usual. What I decided to do was, instead of having different arrays for each different type of resource and tracking it that way, I thought there's going to be a lot of code to write and maintain and get potential bugs in. So what I decided to do is make a union called a resource allocation. I have this resource pool of max resources. I no longer need as many defines or variables to track my resource indices. I've just got one function that returns a handle that the APIs can use. So start by clearing it to 0 and then find the next empty one. At the moment this is just a bit greedy and a bit rubbish. It'll just go through the list to find the next empty one, but that could be optimized with a free list and stuff like that. But the important thing that it's in one place, so I can just go get next resource index. I can optimize how it finds the resource index, so it already has them ready, for example. And then I just check if it's been allocated in the direct API or the deferred API. So basically what happens, if you go like, I'm going to allocate a texture, and you call that in the deferred API, it'll return you the next handle that's going to be free. And then when the direct API comes along, that the command buffer will always be executed sequentially, so that will have the same resource index as in the deferred API. However, it'll get more tricky when we get to start freeing resources and stuff like that. But certainly it's better than it was. I'd no longer have to have these loads of these arrays. I just have one array, and I just go resource pool, clear state, or whatever, and they're stored in there. So I'll give this a test now and see if it works. Okay, finally got it working. The texture's not rendering now because I just hard coded it to bind texture index 0 previously, and now because I don't have texture index 0, I just have an array of different resources. I don't necessarily know which one the texture is. So it's rendering a quad. I've got more control over how the handles are assigned to resources now. And I need to change a few more things, like the clear state. Originally I thought I only need to have it on one. I don't need to have a deferred and a direct version because it doesn't use a D3D device. But then it's going to allocate resource handles and stuff like that. And it's probably better to have the deferred and the direct API separated the same for that, like they are with other things. And then also later on I can change how the handles are found, like free resources and so on. So I got more control over it. It was a bit of a pain to do this because I could have just carried on with doing some more interesting stuff like the sprite, but it's kind of important to just keep tidying up after myself and keep things tidy as I go, otherwise it'll end up like my last project where I just hated the code base in the end and had to move on. So I can remove all this code that I used to have to track the allocations, and it's somewhat simplified, which is nice. So I think I'm gonna just leave it at that for now, and then shortly I'll start getting an animated sprite in and controlling the sprite and stuff like that.